Let's deconstruct the cultural hegemony of the ruling class and talk about some of these myths that uphold the power of the ultra wealthy. So, rich people create jobs. So, we should all be grateful to rich people.
Rich people don't create jobs. Rich people, i.e. wealthy people, own all the stuff that we need to survive, because over several hundred years, they have enclosed all of the resources that we need to survive. And then they use that power over everyone else's survival to force people to work for them for less than what they deserve. And the only option you have is work or die, basically. The way that we got to that point was through basically dispossession.
You want to just briefly touch on the history of enclosure? I mean, that's a big one.
This is what Marx and Marxists call primitive accumulation. It's a very important understanding of the way that capitalism developed, right? Because the liberal story of how capitalism developed was that we were all, in our little huts, and one person decided that they would start making shoes, and another one decided they were going to start building boats, and they wanted to trade with each other, but there weren't any markets. So thankfully, we all figured out how to trade with one another, and then we created capitalism.
It sounds funny when you...
I know, it's absurd, right? It's just, that's what they teach you in Economics 101. The central thing that makes capitalism is not markets, it's capital. And what is capital? It's basically your control over the means of production. So the stuff we need to produce everything. That was land initially. And the enclosures were a process whereby previously common land that was used to kind of graze cattle amongst villages and was kind of held collectively was enclosed into private hatches. And it meant that people who had previously relied upon subsistence to be able to survive were no longer able to rely on subsistence to be able to survive. At the same time, you had the rise of industrialization. So you had big industrialists who needed workers, but workers were not willing to leave their places where, life was extremely hard, but they were rooted in their communities, and they weren't willing to kind of give all that up to go and work for an extremely meager wage and also a highly significant chance of death or injury. So what happened was they were forced off the land. The whole idea of primitive accumulation, of enclosure, was to create a landless class of peasants who had no choice other than to sell their labor power in order to survive. And you see this process continuing all around the world today. When they tie your healthcare to your job, or when it becomes impossible to buy a house without an extremely large salary, when it becomes even impossible to rent without an extremely large salary, you end up in this position where you are faced with this choice of work or die, work or be out on the streets. And that isn't a process that's happened naturally. It is a process that has been guided and directed by people who wanted to exploit human labor and use it to augment their profits.
Long ago, capitalism could have overcome hunger, could have overcome disease, could have, way beyond what we have now. But it didn't. And that's the worst moral condemnation imaginable. How do you justify that when you could, you didn't? Look, let me get at it another way, because this may interest you anyway. The issue is not that capitalism isn't technologically dynamic. It is. And along the way, it has developed things that have helped people's lives get better. No question. But the notion that the mass enjoyment of a rising standard of living is somehow built into capitalism is factually nuts and is such an outrageous, and I can give you, because you do math, you'll understand it. Think of it this way. Imagine a production process in which you have $100 that the capitalist has to lay out for tools, equipment, and raw materials, and $100 that he has to lay out for workers, hire the workers. And he puts them all together, and he has an output. And let's say the output is 100 units of something, and whatever the price is, and that's his revenue. And when he takes his product and sells it and gets the revenue, let's say the revenue is, it doesn't really matter, it's 120, for lack of a better word, and 220, sorry. And he takes 100 of it and replaces the tools, equipment, and raw materials he used up, another 100 to hire the workers for the next shift, and the other 20 is his profit, and he puts that aside. Now along comes a technological breakthrough. A new machine. And the new machine is so effective, you can get the same number of units of output with half the workers. So you don't need to spend 100 on workers, you only need to spend 50. You can do it with half the workers. And so the capitalist goes to the workers, by the way, this happens every day, and he says to half of them, you're fired. Don't come back Monday morning, I don't need you. It's nothing personal, it's just, I got a machine. Why does he do that? Because the 50 he now no longer has to spend on labor, because he doesn't need half of them. He keeps. Everything else is the same. The machine, everything else is the same, just to make the math easy. So he keeps as his own profit the 50 that before he paid for those workers. Right? Because when he sells it for 220, that 50 he doesn't have to give to the next job because he has a new machine. So that's what he does. The technology leads, he's happy. He's become more profitable. He's got an extra 50, which is why he buys the machine. The workers are screwed. Half of them just lost their job, have to go home to their husband and wife, tell them I don't have a job anymore. I didn't do anything wrong. The guy was nice enough to say there was nothing wrong with me, but he doesn't need it. So I'm completely screwed here. I don't know what I'm going to do about the debts we have, the house on mortgage, my children's education, or whatever else he's got going for himself. Right now the point. There was, of course, an alternative path. The alternative path would have been to keep all the workers, pay them exactly the same that you did before for half a day's work. You would have got the same output, same revenue, same profit as before. But the gain of the technology would have been a half a day of freedom every day of the lives of these workers. The majority of workers would have been really helped by this technology. But instead they were screwed so that one guy, the employer, could make a big bundle of more money. You want to support a system like this?
You cannot have meaningful development without electricity. France has a population of 65 million people, yet it generates 4 times more electricity, 4 times, than all the 47 sub-Saharan African countries generate for their 805 million people. What that means is that a French person consumes 50 times more electricity than an African today. So what do you say if a Frenchman told you your continent is rising? You have to ask yourself, what exactly is he saying? And then there is a lot of talk about trade. Africa joining the world and becoming a partner in global trade. I don't know if you checked, moving a ton of fertilizer from a US port to the Kenyan port of Mombasa, which is a 9,000 kilometer journey, costs $40. But moving the same ton of fertilizer from Mombasa to Kampala, 1,000 kilometers away, costs $120. That is 30 times. It costs 30 times more to move cargo across African borders than it costs to move cargo to African ports. That cannot be constituting rising. But now let's talk about aid. Germany was a recipient of aid after the Second World War. So was Japan, so was South Korea, so was Malaysia, or even famous Singapore. They all received aid. But there's something special about them, which is they all, without exception, graduated from being aid recipients within 20 years. By the time those 20 years were over, they were actually giving aid to other people. But Africa, 60 years later, 60 years later, Africans are negotiating on a global stage the next form of aid they think they want to be getting. Why is it that we are not able to graduate from aid? Why is it we are not able to start giving aid to others 60 years later?
And that is true. But you will see people like Ben Shapiro says that, well, if you cannot afford a home in a place where you live, where you call home, maybe you shouldn't be there. Maybe you should move out to somewhere where you can afford a home. And maybe when you move out to that place that you think you can afford a home, after a couple of years, you might have to move out again because that place might become too expensive for you to stay. The problem isn't that we common people are being squeezed. We, the masses, are being squeezed. That's not the problem, according to Ben Shapiro. The problem is that we do not value meritocracy enough, and we have no respect for how far we've come. And we don't appreciate enough how people who are doing all the invention, people who are creating all the resources are. We don't value them enough. That is why we sit in our basement watching Netflix all day and complaining how terrible the economy is, how terrible our lives are, how horrible things have become, and how destructive billionaires are. Because we don't do anything. We are just lazy. We don't have a sense of hardworking. We don't have a sense of appreciation. We don't have a sense of waking up in the morning and making sure that our lives get better. No, 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 no. All these things we don't have a sense of. We don't care about them. All we do is complain all day, from morning, afternoon, evening. Just complain, complain, complain. Ben Shapiro will never factor in the fact that we are being paid less for our time, and we are being expected to work more. We are being paid less than we are being expected to work, and on top of that, our salaries have not kept on with inflation. The billionaires have become more and more rich, while ordinary people have become more and more broke. Listen, the economic runs on a finite number. Okay. The economic runs within a certain amount of cash flow or resources, whatever you want to put it. And if a few people have so much for themselves, a lot of people can't have anything for themselves. It is like we have a liter of water, and if 1% of the population takes half that liter of water, then the 90% or 99% of us are forced to have half that liter of water. Some people at the bottom will have no water at all. It is but simple math. So the only way we can address this is that we have equity. We say, yes, you guys are the billionaires. You guys are the corporations. You guys are the ones who have created this means of production. So you guys should have more than us, but not to an extent that we, the majority of the population, will starve. Not to that extent. Elon Musk is worth about 400 billion. 400 billion. 400 billion. Let that sink in for a second. In a world with a population of just 7 billion, someone is worth 400 billion. That's just one person. That's just one person. So how can you tell me that the bottom 90% are just lazy? Let's take, for example, a bakery where they bake bread. They own the bakery. I mean, the billionaires. They own the bakery. They have the resources to buy the flour, the butter, the sugar, the milk to bake the bread. Now, they need people to labor in that bakery in order for that bread to be baked. They determine how much they will pay you for your time that will be spent in baking that bread. And they also will determine how much that bread will be sold in the market. They own the production. They determine how much they will pay you for your time. And they also determine how much that bread will be sold in the market. Is that fair? Is that fair? So, for example, they pay you $1 for your time. And they turn around and say that to buy a single loaf of bread, you have to buy for like 50 cents. That's what they charge you for that same bread. How are you going to survive? And with a balanced 50 cents, you have to pay housing, you have to pay tax, you have to do this, you have to do that. So how will you survive on that? They spend $1 in that factory and they make a profit of $2 or $3. Is that fair? In any other scenario, that would be considered as cheating, isn't it? That would be considered as cheating. But because societies have allowed corporations to do whatever they want, that kind of method or practice has been legalized. It is just like ordinary business. This is what they will tell you again, that we, the billionaires, don't just steal from you. We don't just steal your pie away, but we create a larger pie that everyone can have a slice. That's what they will tell you. And then you ask yourself, we are the ones making that pie. I mean, we, the common people, are the ones making that pie. How much slice do we get? Or how big is our slice? And the billionaires don't do anything. They just sit there. How big is their slice? They take almost everything while we starve. That is what they do. And that is the only way they can hoard so much wealth for themselves while we all have nothing. So if you sit there and be thinking that capitalism is the best and has done so much, remember, capitalism has also rendered so many people homeless. Capitalism has also rendered so many people broke. And capitalism is just a system, it's just a concept, it's just an idea. It could be abused by people. It could be misused by people. You must remember that. It is not a fair system. It is not the best system. It is just a system.